Mary LaHammer here from Twin Cities PBS with Almanac and Almanac at the Capitol. And the Capitol is where I'm headed now to hear from Governor Tim Walz, who is going to make it official in a news conference saying he is not running for re-election. And that would have been re-election for what we repeatedly called an unprecedented third term. No governor in Minnesota history has won a third term when serving a 4-year term. So this is in modern times. We used to have 2-year terms, but in modern times, no governor had achieved that. And I've done a lot of reporting about what a difficult feat it was and how I closely watched the last DFL governor who attempted to run for a third term. That was Governor Rudy Perpich, and he lost and went on to not get another Democrat in office in Minnesota for quite some time after that. We had Governor Arne Carlson 2 terms after that. Then we had Independence Party Governor Jesse Ventura, and then 2 more terms from Governor Tim Pawlenty. So the last time a Democrat tried and lost a third term, Republicans and independents had the office and Democrats were locked out for 20 years. Now it's been 20 years plus with Democrats winning the race, but Walz seeing the writing on the wall that a very difficult campaign was ahead. And he released a statement on the new year and he said, quote, "Like many Minnesotans, I was glad to turn the page on 2025. It was an extraordinarily difficult year for our state, and it ended on a particularly sour note." He went on to say, "For the last several years, an organized group of criminals have sought to take advantage of our state's generosity, and even as we make progress in the fight against fraudsters, we now see an organized group of political actors seeking to take advantage of the crisis." Again, these are words of Governor Walz saying he's not running again, and directly continued to take on the president. He said, quote, "I won't mince words here. Donald Trump and his allies in Washington, in St. Paul, and online want to make our state colder, meaner place. They want to poison our people against each other by attacking our neighbors." He went on to say, ultimately, they want to take away much of what makes Minnesota the best place in America to raise a family. Went on to note that tax dollars are being taken away, meant to help families afford childcare in the freezing of funds. So he also, again, more talking about the fraud. Most of this statement in announcing he's not running for re-election is addressing fraud and said, quote, "We should be concerned about the fraud in our state government. We cannot effectively deliver programs and services if we can't earn the public's trust. That's why over the last few years, we've made systemic changes in the way we do business." And certainly there have been announcements and changes, but many would say politically that wasn't soon enough. I've gone back and reviewed some of our reporting, and ironically, this was with Blois Olson 4 years ago. Blois and I did a story on how Governor Tim Walz was not putting the issue of fraud to rest, that he was not addressing it practically, politically, communications-wise, messaging. That was 4 years ago. I'll put a link to that story. And Blois is the same person from Fluence Media who broke the story last night, Sunday night, that Governor Walz would not be seeking re-election. Blois and other folks online also saying that he met with Senator Amy Klobuchar, and that was part of his decision. Now, we don't know for sure yet if Klobuchar is going to get in the race for governor. There's been a lot of interest. She's been approached for some time about this. If you also go back to our archives on Almanac at our State Fair show, I first presented that story talking directly to Governor Walz and talking to Amy Klobuchar at the State Fair about this theory that Walz would step down and Klobuchar would run for his office. That was back in the State Fair, probably August, September at that point, long time ago. And they, all tried to deny it and said it wasn't true. It looks like that was discussed potentially over the weekend. We don't know what was discussed, but many reports that Klobuchar definitely met and talked with Governor Walz about his decision not to seek re-election, and perhaps she will get in the race. She would not have to give up her U.S. Senate seat. That's the interesting part, because she has 2 more years left on that term. So we'll see what happens with the churn now about a Democratic race, maybe being wide open, maybe not. A lot of analogies here to President Biden and the pressure for him to step down, which eventually happened, just like Governor Walz. But then concern that there would be somewhat of a coronation, much like the Kamala Harris being selected to replace President Biden, wondering if Amy Klobuchar just becomes the heir apparent, if that also has backlash. We'll have to wait and see what happens with that. Statement from Washington. I just received a very blunt, very straightforward sentence from the Republican Majority Whip, Tom Emmer, Congressman Tom Emmer, responding to Governor Tim Walz getting out of the race for governor. Simply, good riddance. So Big statement there. Lots of fallout to come. Again, Governor Walz is looking at a difficult session ahead. A tied Minnesota House, and Speaker of the House, who is a Republican, Lisa Damuth, one of the frontrunners for governor. Another person for governor was going to be getting even more attention this week. The Republican chair of the Fraud Committee, Kristen Robbins, is going to Washington, D.C. She is scheduled to testify in front of Congress about the fraud Minnesota is facing. So even more attention and more scrutiny after, the New York Times reporting and then an online influencer going to many of the daycares. So this has just been spinning and spinning, and the governor saying that it just may come as a surprise to some, not all of us, but he said he's passing on this race with zero sadness, zero regret, and he enjoyed the job and said, he doesn't leave with sadness. And he talked about servant leadership and said he's confident that a DFLer could hold this position. But the timing is important. He said over the holidays, he reflected on this moment with his family and his team, and he came to the conclusion that he could not give a political campaign his all. And he said, quote, "Every minute I spend defending my own political interests would be a minute I can't spend defending the people of Minnesota against the criminals who prey on our generosity and the cynics who prey on our differences." So much of the reasoning cited in Governor Tim Walz not seeking an unprecedented third term in Minnesota is the fraud that continues to dominate this race and the national and state political discourse. We'll have much more to follow Friday night on Almanac.